Now. Okay.
All right, good afternoon, good morning, and good night. I'm Anthony Ross with UW-Miwaukee and the Lubar School of Business, founding director of the Supply Chain Management Institute, one of the partners on the Sustainable Agricultural Research Education Grant. This is Mark Kosfeld, associate director of the Supply Chain Institute.
Hello. So quick agenda for this PowerPoint. I'll show you some of the model inputs that we used. We'll talk about the 4 different scenarios that we modeled and the results from those scenarios. Some next steps, and then have time for any kind of discussion and Q&A. And stop me as we go through if you do have any questions. That's fine.
Cool.
Put in F5.
Yeah, if you would. All right. So as Anthony mentioned, did have a chance to talk with Melissa, find out about their current network, which she's currently doing to pick up this post-consumer food waste. 12 to 15,000 pounds are picked up on a route. And roughly 20 pickup locations seem to range anywhere from about 15 to 30, but she felt 20 was a average number of pickup locations for these commercial routes. And then, as you mentioned, this would be taken down to, all of it's taken down to Blue Ribbon Organics in Caledonia. Okay, so the sources of the food waste used in the model, there were 33 locations from a data file that we got. So all of those are modeled in the almost 400 tons of food waste produced out of these locations annually. And then as we were modeling, these are held constant. And so what we're really looking at in the model are the different destinations that these sources of food waste could go to. So we hold this constant, and then we vary the destinations that we give the model and see what the impact is on the cost. Okay. One thing that we did do in the model is we clustered these sources. What this allowed us to do is this allowed us to look at more destinations. There was a limit in the model of the number of locations and location combinations, as you can imagine, origin, destination combinations that we could look at. So here's just a quick example of one of the clusterings. You see 4 different locations over on the right-hand side in the graphic, and knowing the volumes in terms of tons of food waste coming out of each one of those 4 locations, we can identify what we call the center of gravity location. And so then that is modeled in the, or used in the model as the location for that cluster. And so that's shown in the red circle there in the graphic.
And so all of those cluster locations that are not circled, Greg and Seamus, represent clusters of locations.
Oh, okay, okay.
Clusters of locations that are in such close proximity at the center of gravity for those clusters of locations forms a pseudo or a meta location that we can use in the modeling.
Okay, that was my question was, you know, the distance between each of these points looks like it's pretty significant, but if they're each their own cluster, then that makes more sense.
Right. This is a little bit of model simplification for our purposes of this project for now.
Yeah.
It's different from vehicle routing, which would then need for us to look at every single individual location.
Right, right.
Routing at this stage.
Okay, and so we have these clusters set up around Milwaukee based on the 33 sources of food waste. Okay. On the destination side, there's 39 different destinations that were modeled. Certainly Blue Ribbon Organics in Caledonia, the current destination is one of them, plus there's another 38 possibilities that are given to the model, see which ones it wants to choose depending on the scenario that we're running. And then we also have an annual capacity for each one of these destinations. So a destination may be close, but it may not be large enough. It may not have a capacity. So the model may skip over using that destination and in favor of a different destination that may be further away, but may have a higher capacity.
Mark, how did you determine capacity for one site versus another?
I believe that was given in the file. So the data file had a capacity, I think it was from Nicole Enders.
Yeah, Nicole's data.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, I know that she looked more closely at her. She kind of highlighted 6 locations, but maybe she had many more, and that's what you're using when you come up with 38.
Yes. Yeah, so those 6 are used in the model, and then the additional 33, current one included, are being used as well as options for the model.
Yes, that gives us some scalability, Greg, for the whole process. You can scale the problem, if you will.
Okay, yeah, right on.
Okay, here's a couple little snapshots out of the model, a couple little snippets showing for each origin cluster, you can see the amount of food waste coming out of each one of those clusters in terms of tons per year. There you see the capacity for 3 representative destinations model. And then we also go through and using the information that Melissa provided, are able to turn that into a cost per ton for each route. So a route from origin cluster 1 and those locations to destination 1, 22, and then back again, so returning home is $22.98 per ton. And so we feed this information into the model. It knows how much each one of those origin destination combinations costs, and then it's able to go through and assign the tonnage that should be routed on each one of the origin destination combinations. That's what you see here on the next slide. Just one example, output, 9 different origin clusters, 6 different destinations across the top. You see a lot of zeros, that it's not choosing some of those locations because they're more expensive, but it finds location 5 in this example as a highly favorable location out of many of the origin clusters.
So if I'm looking at this correctly, right, is that basically what the model has shown us is that it would be in somebody like Melissa's best interest to not have D3 or D6 as a destination for that food waste, correct?
Correct.
Right, okay, so, okay, gotcha, cool, okay.
All of the locations in origin 1, cluster 1, if you will.
Right.
Meaning that's how you would allocate or assign their pickup volumes to that particular compost facility.
Okay, okay, wow, cool.
Okay, so that's the model. Let me just kind of describe what we mean by a route. So a route in the model follows these 5 steps. So we depart the headquarters, so Compost Crusader current headquarters in South Milwaukee. We go to the center of gravity of the origin cluster, and then we allow for a 30-mile of travel both within that origin cluster, and then in talking with Melissa, there are times that they have to make ad hoc pickups, which we know weren't included in that file. So that 30 miles allows that vehicle to travel within that origin cluster, make those pickups at those sources of food waste. Then we take it to whichever destination the model deems most cost effective. And then we come back to the Compost Crusader headquarters. So that is essentially the day of one of the truck drivers traveling along this route, taking, as I mentioned from a previous slide, about 20 pickups, and then taking it to the destination, whatever destination that may be in the scenario, and then coming back to the headquarters for the night.
And so Anthony, what you had mentioned is, so bullet point number 3 is where that transportation analysis would come in, right?
Yeah, so that would be looking at the exact sequences.
Right. Okay.
One to pick up.
Just making sure I'm following. Okay.
All right. So 4 scenarios were run. The first scenario, we always start when we model something, we model the current network. And so here what we want to do is we want to calibrate the network. So anytime within the Supply Chain Management Institute we do these kinds of analyses, our first scenario is always to calibrate with what's currently happening. So that's what we're modeling here. Pick up from all of these sources of food waste and take everything down to Blue Ribbon Organics down in Caledonia. And so we'll see what the results give us there. That becomes the baseline then, which we can then compare scenarios 2, 3, and 4 against. So then scenario 2, we're going to just limit the model to picking up from those, or I'm sorry, delivering to those 6 locations identified by Nicole Enders in her paper. In scenario 3, we'll keep those 6 destinations, and then we'll allow it to choose 1 additional location from that'd be the other 33 locations that it has to choose from. So those 6 plus 1, and then scenario 4 is a 6 plus 2, allowed to pick up to 2 locations, most optimal delivery locations for the sources of food waste. Any questions on the 4 different scenarios? I'll go into detail on the results of each one.
Just a question to clarify, is you showed an earlier chart where depending on the source of origin, the origin cluster, only 1 was selected in each column, meaning there was a best location of the 6 I think you were showing. Is that what's going to happen here? It's going to pick the best, so it'll pick the best out of 6, the best out of 7, and the best out of 8 choices? Sure, good question. In that example, there was enough capacity in each one of those destinations for the 100% of the food waste from that origin to travel to that destination. If it encountered a capacity constraint, then it would go to the second best option.
Okay.
So all 4 of these scenarios, I'll tell you there was enough capacity for it to deliver everything from 1 origin location to whichever destination it chose. But that could certainly happen in the model, and we saw that early on as we tried some different capacities, that it would then split it amongst 2 different destinations, for instance.
So it's hierarchical. You fill this box, and then once that one's full, it goes to the next one.
Yep. Right, but from a policy point of view too, and and again, this is for like future phases. I want Greg to hear this so he can kind of figure out how he wants to kind of incorporate into his write-up. Right. Keep in mind that we keep on the input side the number of destinations and those clusters constant.
Right.
So as we grow the number of pickup locations, I see Seamus shaking his head, so you see where I'm going with this, right?
Yep.
Locations on the pickup side, obviously this has that scalability as well. And also, right, if there are conversations around, remember Greg, the last time we met, who was it at Blue Ribbon, the gentleman?
James.
He had said he knows something about some of the locations that Nicole had chosen, and that I know for a fact that location is not feasible, or this location is not feasible. And so it raised the question of, well, can you give us a list of locations that you also feel are feasible? We can include those locations as well. Again, this whole idea of scalability of this approach, on either the destination side, sources side, and then also the capacity side. If you want to tell me or describe physically, well, destination 3 only has a capacity of X tons, destination Y has can only hold like 20 tons, right? Those are constraints in a more advanced model called phase 2 that we can also incorporate into this as we scale it up. Does that make sense conceptually?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So the first scenario, this again helps us calibrate the model. given the volume, the almost 400 tons worth of food waste that's picked up, it would cost Melissa almost $25,000. That, with her current network, we put those inputs into the model, and we get something very close to that 24.9 expected cost. So we're within 2% of the expected cost. So that we had working in the Supply Chain Management Institute, did a lot of work on this first scenario, calibrating the model, making sure that the model truly represented that route, and making those pickups as we kind of described on the previous slides. We felt real confident that we got it within 2%, and then to be able to use that now going forward and saying, okay, now what if we don't have everything going to Blue Ribbon Organics? So now we give it, in scenario 2, 6 options. And so here's the 6 different destinations, and then the volume that was routed to each one of those destinations. You see there's 2 of them that didn't choose at all.
Okay.
70-some% of the volume went to destination 5 in Bayview. That destination is about 3 miles from the current Compost Crusaders headquarters.
Okay.
So given that the model routes that volume from our origin clusters in this way to these destinations, total cost is $23.7, which represents about a 3.5% savings over our 24.6 baseline.
In your world, is that a significant enough savings to make a difference, or is it not?
Yeah, in transportation, yeah, if you can save 3-4%, now the percentage is more important here than the raw dollar amount, because it's just a model of representative, about 400 tons worth of food waste. So excuse me. So yes, I think a 3.5% savings is significant. I haven't gotten Melissa's take on this, but I would expect that if she could reduce her cost by 3.5%, I think she would be all over that.
Yeah, you're talking driver labor cost as well on an annualized basis.
Yep.
Right.
Wear and tear on your trucks, all of that. Yeah.
Are those things captured in your cost?
Yeah.
Because we have her financials.
Yeah, her costs are a combination of some fixed costs and fixed overhead costs, and then also the variable cost of executing that route every day. And if she's got a shorter route, less fuel consumption, less miles that are traveled, and so that reduces the variable cost to make these various pickups.
Yeah, because she's currently taking it down. Where's she currently taking it?
Down to Blue Ribbon, right?
Blue Ribbon, right?
Yeah,
Caledonia.
Yeah, and so you can see then that if the model in scenario 2 is saying, you know what, that location up in Bayview is only 3 miles away,
right?
You get the cost savings, labor time savings, and her time, right? Differential by delivering to a different location. So those are the kinds of new insights. Again, we can't capture policy implications right now or boots on the ground, but again, we're showing you what's possible.
Well, and 2, it's clearly showing, if you have to pick between these 6 locations of where you want to lobby, policymakers to allow this to be a compost site, clearly Bayview is the one in the scenario, So yeah, I think there's some great policy implications for this.
And or trade-offs, because then you can look at the sizing of the deliveries. If the people don't want such a big compost facility in Bayview area,
right.
Capture those in a second round modeling.
Wow.
Any other questions on?
No, not yet. I think if you want to just keep going, I'm kind of saving some questions.
Sure. Yeah, we'll look at 3 and 4 here. So this is the 6+1, the 6 locations, and then from the other 33 locations, you get to choose one model, and it happened to chose us one in Oak Creek. It routed some of the volume to this location in Oak Creek. If I'll just go back, one thing you'll notice is that volume out of Wilson Park, so that 17 tons, is no longer there in scenario 3. It's found a better location to take that to. Didn't save that much more money. Still works out to be about 3.5% savings. So it's a slightly cheaper. We're talking, a few pennies per ton, kind of cheaper, in that location instead of location 1.
Now,
otherwise everything is the same. All the other origin clusters routed to the same destination. So we thought that was kind of interesting. We expected more shakeup when we gave 33 additional locations. The other thing we also thought was interesting is when we went to scenario 4, it didn't pick a second location. So now you get to choose 2 out of these 33 additional locations. Said, I like the Oak Creek location, and I'm not finding anything else cheaper in those options you're giving me, so I'll stick with these 7. So, and scenario 3 and 4 have the same results.
Right.
That 8th location wasn't used.
So one question right off the bat that I've got is that I'm not familiar with the geography of Milwaukee and Oak Creek at all. But just that trade-off between number 1 and number 7, would there be a point at which in a successive phase of modeling that you would be able to show the break there, right? Like when does it make sense for me to go to Wilson Park, and when does it make sense for me to go to Oak Creek?
Right. We call those tipping points.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. Part of our sensitivity analysis, absolutely. Seamus, you're spot on.
Okay.
And I think as we had more volume on the input side, more pickup locations. Early on, I think we'd see a little bit more of the impact of sensitivity even from phase scenario 1 to scenario 2 if we were adding more pickup destinations as well.
Right, okay. And then just from the very beginning, when you said that you were calibrating the model and you get it to within 2% of Melissa's cost, is that in terms of the kind of analysis and modeling that you do, is 2% good? Is it typical? Is it better? Is it, can you give us a sense of that accuracy there?
Yeah, absolutely. In a network model like this, 2% is fantastic.
Okay, yeah, that's
so
what
we were elated with that. Depending on what you're modeling, you may be comfortable with a 5% or a 10% difference. That may be enough of a difference that you're still confident in the output of the model. Like Anthony said, one of the things that we also do with these kinds of analyses in the Institute is we do some follow-up sensitivity analysis, and that's what we're working on here in January, to understand if we tweak some of these inputs, do any of the results change? How sensitive are the results to some of these assumptions that we've made up front, or some of the data that we've used to feed into the model?
Guys, if I just interrupt for a second here, I had to move a meeting from 11 to 11:30, so I hate to rush you. I'd love to spend as much time as possible on this, but I've already pushed my limits with that person. So
okay,
if you could breeze through these, I definitely have a few questions, or just I'd like to ask when you're done.
Okay.
Yeah. So those were the 4 scenarios, and so that nice lead into the next steps. As I was mentioning, we'll finish up the sensitivity analysis here in the Institute in January. And 2 of the sensitivities that we're looking at, and we're welcome to your input as well. How does this headquarters location change? And so if Compost Crusader is not, they're located fairly close to the Milwaukee airport. So let's say they have a different headquarters location that's north of Milwaukee. Does that change the optimal destinations for these food sources of food waste? So we're looking at that. The other one that we're looking at is the relative volumes of food waste coming out of each one of those sources. So if some of those sources of food waste grow faster than others, then that changes where that center of gravity resides, and we'll see if that impacts these results as well.
Great.
That was the last one.
Well, that's wonderful. And your second question there is what what I was thinking of, but I think the first one could be just as important. I know Melissa is pretty happy where she's located now, but Milwaukee is a big, sprawling city, and it would be interesting to think about, if she was to have a second location, where would it make most sense? That would seem to change a lot of things. I mean, that would change a lot. And then with the volumes, what I wrote down wasn't so much that the volume increases in one area more than others. I initially just wanted to ask you, what happens if, say, the overall volume just quadruples in all places? Does nothing really change? I mean, do you essentially have the exact same savings percentage, or does something else happen when you quadruple?
Good question. We can add that as well. I think that's a valid sensitivity analysis. Everything would stay the same as long as we don't hit any of the capacity constraints of the destinations. Yeah.
Which presumably you would start to hit some of those constraints.
4 times the cost, I would expect, with 4 times the volume, something to that effect. Where some things may change is if now some of our destinations hit their capacity, and that now forces that overflow volume go to a second or a third location.
Well, one thing I wrote down just was just the whole idea of considering a decentralized model, and that was something that the previous graduate student Tim Allen was kind of in favor of a more decentralized model, and so I think it's really helpful to really just kind of think of think about what that might look like. I think the work that Seamus is doing is also looking at what happens when you grow the volume. We're talking about doubling it right now, but I think to really look ahead, I think quadrupling it might be more looking more deep, because if you look at the volumes that we're talking about at this point, it's really small volumes. He's got a pie chart that shows all of the composting that's happening versus food waste going to landfill, and it's a tiny sliver. So we might as well think big and think about quadrupling.
If you told us at the outset that, as you mentioned, that you were expecting 100 participants, you got 600 instead.
Right.
So that in my mind, that would also change the visual look of those clusters we put on the first slide, right?
Oh, yeah.
Now, more and more clusters that are probably smaller, maybe more geographically dispersed in terms of the distance between those locations. A lot of those dynamics you'll see in the results we presented. You'll see a lot more interaction from scenario to scenario as we reach that saturation point, if you will.
Right.
Well, I guess because
come up with a list of potential locations you'd like for us to add, and reconsidering the model down the road to mimic or closely model that more saturation on the input side, just let us know.
Okay. Well,
we need a expected volume, and we're good to go.
Okay. Well, I guess I'd like to spend the last, sort of 6, 7, 8 minutes I can spare at this point, just to think about, what to do with this with your work, really in the next several months, and I've asked the same thing of Seamus's work, and my goal all along has been that we know what the amount of money that we've been able to put into this. We can't produce, final products or final assessments. We're just getting started, but what we promised the funder was that we were going to get some of these parties to come together and agree on a plan. And what I ask of both your work and Seamus's modeling is, what's the most effective way to use this stuff to help people see where we need to focus our attention in a plan. And I still need to sort of absorb what both of you have done.
Yeah.
I'm a little bit more familiar with Seamus's at this point. Would you mind sharing your screen, just that model? Just in the sense that when I look at his model, it becomes, I think we can help use this photo, this image of the system to get the stakeholders to focus in on, do you have to take the screen away? Or
yeah, if you guys can hit stop share.
You could just take it.
I can't, no, because I'm not a...
If you stop sharing, he can take over. There you go.
Perfect.
What this model here shows, I'll just use your mouse. This is the landfill at the one end. We're using the red to kind of symbolize bad, if you want. So this is landfill that causes methane. The landfill is filling up quickly, so then you got to find a new one. No one wants it in their backyard. So basically, I think most people would agree that shifting it away from the landfill towards composting or towards other things that this model doesn't capture, like feeding people, taking food waste before it goes bad and getting it into shelter, food pantries. But just looking at this is where Melissa's data, and you've maybe seen some of this data, breaks it out into restaurants or grocery stores or residential or whatever, all feeding into here. What happens here is right now Melissa is happily taking everything to Blue Ribbon. What happens when he hits capacity is she has no choice but to overflow. If he can't take it, she's got nowhere else to go. Right now the volumes are fine, and if he runs this scenario, there's no, this doesn't show any overflow. Sure. Then it goes through, James adds yard waste to it, and he makes a finished product. And right now, he's basically selling all of his product without a problem for farm and gardens, some of which, getting back to our projects, one of our two goals is that some of that compost goes into the 10 zip codes, and he does provide some. But what happens if he produces too much compost and he doesn't have markets for it, he also has an overflow problem where it just piles up in his yard, and at some point he's violating DNR limits on how much food waste or compost you could have stacked in your yard, or just physical limitations. So what we want to run is scenarios where we again maybe quadruple the volume and see what happens. If you quadruple the volume, we would predict that she's going to have a serious overflow problem. And if he makes an investment to solve her problem, he opens another site, maybe a site that's exactly where your modeling tells him it should be. That's great, but maybe he has the problem of, oh great, I'm composting all this, but I don't have a market for it all, so he continues to have an overflow problem. So it enables us to think about both problems and address them. So here he's got food waste that's just going to, heck, it could go back to the landfill, essentially. He might have to haul it to a landfill, finished compost, simply because he can't leave it on his site. So in our planning, go ahead.
That becomes very costly now, right?
Yeah,
right. Back to it, you've added value to it. Now it's sitting, and now you're going to move it to a landfill, and you got to pay tips.
Right. Yeah. So we're hoping that this model and talking about it in this way enables us to think about how can we solve problems before they happen. So if we want to boost consumer education and promotion, and your idea a whole year ago, Anthony, of reaching out to the corporate world and saying, hey, why don't you guys start thinking about diverting? That's great, but we just need to be prepared for the problems that causes. It's basically expanding our footprint of composting and making sure we can sell the stuff. And then the other thing that this is kind of ignoring, or that I've ignored so far, is that Blue Ribbon Organics only one player. Sanimax and Compost Crusader is one player. We haven't really had, apart from Tim Allen reaching out to Sanimax once, we don't really have a channel of communication with Sanimax right now. We don't know how much, we know how much they're delivering to James. That's about it. We don't know where they're getting it. And then there's this whole issue down here of Orchard Ridge. Orchard Ridge, as we understand it, is a landfill. It might be the landfill that serves Milwaukee. I'm not sure. But they are also, on a comparatively small scale compared to the landfill, they are composting yard waste and they're incorporating food waste. Our understanding is that none of that really is going to farm and gardens. This is really inaccurate. Our understanding is they're mostly just putting it on their own landfill. They're using that product to cap their landfill as they go. Unfortunately, Orchard Ridge, Purple Cow have not been as forthcoming with data as these guys up here. So this up here is much more accurate. And then you wanted to show something?
Yeah, I guess just really quick is that one of the things that I can show is, just like what Greg was talking about in wanting to see, some of these slivers of the pie grow. So this is right now in the current model that I've got, this is the food waste destination. So the red is the landfill. And you can see that, 99% of it is going to the landfill, but to grow that sliver of diversion.
And that's just showing the sources of different compost.
Yeah.
And what was this one here? Was this?
This one is, percentage of who's doing the hauling.
Okay.
So here, obviously, Sanimax has got the larger volume, and Compost Crusader is there too, but we don't have data for the other two. Those are the only ones, yeah.
Are these numbers all looking at post-consumer food waste, or just total?
Total food waste.
Okay.
And with all of this, I mean, a lot of our data is rough, but I've been talking to Seamus about, Tim Allen collected the first round of data. Melissa's been really good about helping explain that data and maybe providing a little more around cost. But I would like, while we got their attention, and while they start to see what we can do with data, your work, his work, that maybe they'd be willing to provide more data. So right now we're working with 2016 data, and I've asked Seamus over the next month or so, can he come up with a Google form maybe that just makes it easy for these players to basically provide us with updates on all this data. So now suddenly we've got 2 years of data. And I guess as a way to transition and let me move on to my other meeting, which I'm bummed. I wish I would have seen your text earlier, Anthony, but we could have pulled you into the other meeting. But I guess what I'd like to do next, just focus our attention is mid-February, late February, something like that. Have one of these kind of meetings. Make it more of a sort of webinar where quite a few people would only be watching. They won't.
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah.
And maybe we could reach a little broader than our typical group, and maybe reach some corporate folks who are interested. Just let them watch.
Sure.
And then maybe a few days before, a week before, we all practice.
Yeah.
And we kind of get down, who's going to talk for how long.
Right.
And my goal is basically show his work, show your work, and hopefully it feeds into the plan, which we've, and I'll show it real quickly. We have
like policymakers on your end help us promote that within their own organizations, like MMSD and some of the other policy organizations. Start promoting it there, and then we can bring in the corporate folks as well.
Right, exactly. So I don't know where it's at right now. The plan. Can you see this right now?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, so this is something you can't force a plan on anyone, but over the last couple of years, we've been slowly trying to find where is there some consensus. Number one, improving data collection and analysis. These started as Tim's recommendations, and so I'm hoping that just by showing them some cool things that we can do with the data, that there'd be an incentive for them to share more. And in terms of looking at number three, making necessary infrastructure improvements. Where should we really hone in on a new site? For instance, or what policy changes. So in terms of policy, I think the Department of Public Works will have a lot of choice in where they expand their residential pickup. And maybe your models would help them to say, and help Melissa understand that, boy, I would really like the next expansion to be here, because this is where I have capacity. This is where I have the cheapest transportation.
Money,
I think Seamus, I like your model. I'd love to look at that some more and maybe use it in one of my upcoming lectures for MBA. I think Seamus really gets at helping laymen really get this issue from a policy point of view at the very least, and I think it could be very powerful to help get them to draw them in. into this phase when you really want to talk about how does it actually work and what is it going to cost me, those kinds of nuts and bolts kinds of questions, those are the kinds of things we can, as we've demonstrated, can capture in our model, use some of the policy discussion using Stamos's model, actually capture as constraints in our detailed nuts and bolts model in the weeds, if you will. See what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That this is a great mix, and Mark, don't let me go too far. What we're both doing here is a great blended way to capture this problem. I'm excited about it.
Yeah.
And so I'll say that, and my last comment is that if we can do that webinar in February timeframe, maybe that's the seed plant to say, hey, now let's do a conference or a workshop at UWM campus this coming summer. Get everybody into the campus for, well, from different perspectives, all the constituents and stakeholders involved here on campus.
That sounds fantastic. And I also recorded the meeting we held earlier. Donna requested it, so now I'll have these 2 recordings. I will say that I made a comment during it, just kind of trying to assess your report. I was trying to explain your report, and my quick assessment was that, well, I read the report, and what I understood it to be was that it didn't make a huge difference where new sites were. But in the back of my mind, I thought, well, 3 to 4%, maybe that is, makes all the difference. In a lot of industries, that makes all the difference between going out of business and making a profit. So ignore
the dollars. Yeah, 3 to 5% is a lot.
Yeah. So please forgive my earlier characterization of it. I was just trying to quickly tell them what I understood. But I'm excited that it does make a difference. And so I can share that. I'll share that link with both of you. It might be
too. Share with them.
What's that?
Yeah, please share the link of this meeting with them.
I will.
Share the link for the other meeting with us, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I will. So those will go out, sometime this week as I catch up with stuff. And in ours, you will see a woman who is sitting right here, who is Becky Larson, Dr. Rebecca Larson, who is I've been kind of told is an up and coming professor in our system, and she's very engaged. She's working with a guy who does this modeling stuff, optimization. Technology. She also mentioned sensitivity analysis. So you guys are a lot on the same page. And I think if we have your work, his work, and we can kind of start to bring her into a conversation, and we get the players starting to talk about and agree upon a plan, to me, their funding, I just believe it, funding will come along. Funding will materialize to take this further.
And so I guess the 2 things is I'll send you, Anthony, some image files of my model, and then a little write-up so that you have got that. And then also I'll work with both of you on the Google form for data collection so that we might be able to capture some of the data that you also want as well at the same time.
Okay. Well, I feel like I've gotten, more than I ever hoped, really, or expected from your shop already. So I mean, I'm just thrilled with this so far. I think at this point we're running on fumes. He's going to be 10% this semester, and then he's gone. I'll put time into it because I see the potential, but I guess I never want to ask more of partners than they can give. If we can do a webinar in February and maybe kind of culminate in some kind of edit on your campus in the summer, that would just be amazing.
It would be nice. It would be well timed.
Yeah.
I think our community would be ready for it.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. Well, thank you guys. I'm sorry I had to rush this, but it was nice to meet you, Mark. And I'm going to stop recording here.